We may as well get this show on the road. It is approximately 2 o'clock Eastern time, and I normally put up videos that would be showing right about now. But this just crossed my desk, and it may have crossed yours too. But Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys passed away. He was 82 years old. And I know that like Sly of Sly and the Family Stone passed away a couple days ago also. But Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys meant a lot to me. I don't talk about them a lot on my channel, but I'm going to talk about them on my channel right now because of the fact that they were so instrumental in my early love of music that I can't imagine my love of music if I hadn't been introduced to the Beach Boys as a youngster. In fact, I remember being a little kid and hearing "I Get Around" for the first time and going, "Yeah, that's kind of catchy." But Brian Wilson, Beach Boys co-founder, for those of you who don't know, the original Beach Boy lineup was three Wilson brothers, Mike Love and Al Jardine. So I've got the People magazine article in front of me. I saw it elsewhere, the New York Times, Washington Post, and so on. But Stacy Lamb of People writes that he helped define the California sound. And that is an understatement if there ever was one, but there's only so much you can say about somebody as important as Brian Wilson was to music. The musician family announced his death today in an Instagram post featuring a recent photo of the star smiling on a on a bench. "We are heartbroken to announce that our beloved father, Brian Wilson, has passed away." The statement read, "We are at a loss for words right now. Please respect our privacy at this time as our family is grieving. We realize that we are sharing our grief with the world. Love and Mercy." And by the way, Love and Mercy was the name of the movie about Brian Wilson starring John Cusack. And of course, I'm a big fan of John Cusack's as well, so I like the movie. But they signed their thing with the Love and Mercy. People magazine described Brian Wilson in 1975 as the formative genius of the group. He served as the rock band's songwriter and co-lead vocalist, also played bass and keyboard alongside his brothers Dennis and Carl, and their cousin Mike Love and a friend Al Jardine. That's the original five, who were the original lineup. He was born on June 20th, 1942 in Inglewood, California. Wilson was the eldest child among his siblings. His brothers were born in 44 and 46. From an early age, he was said to have an aptitude for music. And there's been several books written about him, about his abilities with pitch and melody, and obviously a genius for songwriting. At the age of 19, along with his brothers and his friend and his cousin, they formed the Beach Boys, initially known as the Pendletons. Now, in the article here, it says Pendletones, but I believe it's Pendletons. I think they were taking the name off the shirt, the Pendleton shirt, but they became known as the Beach Boys. He co-wrote the group's first song, Surfin'. By 1962, they released their first studio album, Surfin' Safari. With the success of their sophomore effort, Surfin' USA, there's a bit of a theme going there. And two subsequent albums, also released in 1963, back in a time when bands released several albums a year. They helped cultivate and become synonymous with the California sound. A few years later, Wilson helped the group expand beyond that surf and beach culture with more mature music, culminating in 1966 with Pet Sounds, the scrapped but famous effort Smile, and the single Good Vibrations, which is a masterpiece in and of itself. This first album, Pet Sounds, of that group we're talking about, is what eventually cemented Wilson and the Beach Boys' place in rock and roll history, with the album going on to become one of the most influential of all time. And it was an amazing thing, especially when you consider the music that preceded it. And a lot of the Beach Boys music seemed very teenagerish, surfing and cars and girls and high school and all this stuff. And if you don't know about Pet Sounds, the album is very, very mature, especially for being written by such a young person. And there's some great songs on there that are also rather introspective. And I remember buying that album and listening to it a few years after it came out, because it came out in '66. But it was such a landscape of music that you could listen to over and over and over again. So when it comes to Good Vibrations, which topped the Billboard Hot 166, Wilson told People in 2018 that was a very complex record, and he's putting it lightly. He said, "We cut that in 4 studios. The verse is at Gold Star, the bridge at Sunset Sound, The background music for the chorus is at Western and the vocals at Columbia. My brother said, Brian, this is going to be a #1 record. And I said, I know. So for those of you who are just joining us right now, Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, has passed away. He's 82 years old. I was a huge fan, still am a huge fan of the Beach Boys. And I saw them live probably 10 times. And in fact, one of the times I saw them, Brian Wilson was touring with them. He toured with them briefly in 76, 77, right around there. And I saw the band when he was with them one time. So I actually did see Brian Wilson on stage performing with the Beach Boys. So, yeah, Skylar Perrone, the best memories had Brian Wilson in the background. Gwen Luck, the end of an era. Piper John, the Beach Boys were never really my cup of tea, but much respect for what they contributed to the music scene of their era. Rest in peace, Brian. That's the thing, is you don't have to like their music to understand that what they were doing was quite different and groundbreaking. And they went from writing songs that were 2 minutes long and basically sounded like they've been taken and done in one take in a studio to meticulous recordings with the best musicians available, who, by the way, were often not the Beach Boys playing the instruments, but they sang, but they often would bring in ringers to play the instruments, and including like Carol Kane to play the bass, and the Wrecking Crew and so on. But the music was fabulous, and the construction of it. Two Car Talkers, Help Me Rhonda. Help Me Rhonda. And of course, Little Deuce Coupe. So for the two, thanks to the Impromptu Live. Test Pilot, I was just listening to the Beach Boys. PA Beater, Sloop John B was a good one. And that's the thing, there's so many songs by them that were so good. And Sloop John B, again, is one of those amazing songs. And speaking of harmonies, Aaron Z, they could harmonize with the best of them. Bernadine Sackinger, All Summer Long, Warmth of the Sun. So, despite the Beach Boys' soaring popularity and continued success in the charts, Wilson started to succumb to various mental instabilities brought on by depression over deafness in one ear and unofficial musical rivalry with the Beatles. It's unclear how much that really was. The relentless nature of being on tour, what people described later in 1975 as the excesses of the 60s. Wilson became a victim of his own genius. Years later, after the continued mental decline and increased self-destructive behavior, he went into reclusion after his father died in June of 1973. And the brothers always had issues with their dad, Murray. Murray was their manager, and he probably got them their first record deal. But he was also known as a bit of a hard driver. And I know at one point in time, he sold off the music catalog for nothing. And Brian had to go to court and sue to get it back. And his dad apparently respected the fact they're making hit records, but it's kind of like, yeah, but it's just that surf music. So in 1991, Wilson told people his father's abuse and a 2x4 caused deafness in my right ear. So he said basically that his dad hit him and caused him to go deaf in one ear, which, as you can imagine, would be bad for anyone, doubly bad for a musician. So he added that his childhood and adolescence were very sad times in my life because I always had to turn my head to hear things, trying to imagine where those voices were coming from. So he had help of a psychologist named Eugene Landy, but of course that came with other issues. Wilson made a brief comeback in 76. They made the album The Beach Boys Love You before falling back into another years-long depression fueled by drugs and alcohol. He had other health issues in the 70s. He became obese and withdrawn. He put his piano inside a huge indoor sandbox, and for 1 2-year period, never left the house, according to People magazine. Again, Landy helped him kick some of those habits, but if you've seen the movie about Brian Wilson's life, Eugene Landy is not exactly a hero in it. Paul Giamatti does a great job of playing him, though. Wilson told people, I've been through a great deal of mental anguish. I felt like a fat slob. It was very embarrassing. I used to go on stage and it was scary. Now I'm getting used to it. I feel a lot more confidence in myself. He added that through therapy, I had to learn to get off a lot of bad stuff. Test Pilot says, I Can Hear Music. The Beach Boys with Kathy Tricoli. I Can Hear Music, again, is one of their lesser-known songs. But again, a masterpiece. They had so much stuff that was good that the stuff they had that wasn't hits could have been hits. Yeah, Pounce is Human says, I'm thinking of the Bare Naked Ladies song, Brian Wilson. And a lot of people heard that song and didn't understand. I think they were paying an homage to Brian Wilson because songwriters recognize that this guy wrote a lot of great music. So Isaac Bob York, I Get Around. Yeah, of course, that's one of their early catchy hits. Piano TM said, I heard you mention Sloop John B when it came on, by the way. It's either that or Kokomo. It's my favorite. Kokomo, interestingly enough, was not written by Brian Wilson. It's written by John Phillips, the Mamas and the Papas. But, of course, they had a big hit with it, and it was in a couple movie soundtracks and so on. Dennis Kneifer, I saw him and the Beach Boys play at the Surf Ballroom. Buddy Holly's last performance location is a wonderful night. John Green Music's God Only Knows is probably the greatest song ever written. I believe Paul McCartney said that. A lot of people have said that. God Only Knows. And it's one of their lesser known songs in terms of, I don't think it was as big of a hit as some of their other stuff. But it was one of those songs that a lot of people heard later and said, oh, that's good. That's really good. And it does not sound so much like some of their earlier surf music. Rare Book, Surf's Up is the best Beach Boys song, hands down. Surfer Girl, probably the best song you ever wrote, Jonathan R. Mindbend, hello all. Hello, Mindbend. So, by the mid-1990s, he embarked on a career resurgence, which saw him going back into the studio and performing on stage again. He released several solo albums during that time, including Brian Wilson Presents Smile, which was his version of the uncompleted Beach Boys record that got scrapped earlier. In 2012, he released his 11th solo album, At My Piano. Same year, the Beach Boys performed at the 54th Annual Grammy Awards, capping off a successful 50th anniversary tour and celebrated release of the album, That's Why God Made the Radio. Wilson said, I feel good. I really do feel good these days. This whole year has been very emotional. And what do you call that word? Sentimental. Throughout his career, Wilson received a number of accolades. He earned 9 Grammys. 9 Grammy nominations, collecting most of those early on with the Beach Boys. His 2 wins, however, were for his solo work in 2005 and 2013. As a member of the Beach Boys, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in '88, recognized by the Kennedy Center in '07, earned a Golden Globe in 2016 for writing an original song featured on the soundtrack of the biopic Love and Mercy, starring Paul Dano as Wilson. So Wilson's life and career were subsequently chronicled in 2021 documentary Brian Wilson, The Long Promised Road. During all of this, Wilson was married twice, first to Marilyn from 64 to 79, and to Melinda Kay, whom he married in 95. They were together until her death in January of 24. A month later, his family filed for conservatorship in a Los Angeles court, stating that he had a major neurocognitive disorder. They also noted that Wilson was unable to properly provide for his personal needs for physical health, food, clothing, or shelter. He had 2 daughters, Carney and Wendy. In the 80s, the siblings formed the chart-topping girl group Wilson Phillips, with China Phillips, the daughter of John and Michelle Phillips of the Mamas and Papas, John being the one who wrote the song Kokomo. With Ledbetter, Wilson adopted 5 children. That was his second wife. They're good kids, he said, in 2012. He is survived by his children, and both of his brothers, Dennis and Carl, predeceased him. Dennis drowned. Carl died, I believe, of lung cancer a while back. So very sad. Brian Wilson, 82 years old. I remember one of my older brothers bought the album Endless Summer. And you have to understand the Beach Boys were hugely popular in the early 60s with the stuff like I Get Around and Surf and Safari and all that stuff. And they kind of peaked, and then Pet Sounds and Good Vibrations. And then after that, they started tailing off a little bit and it falling a little bit away from the public consciousness. And so Capitol Records put out Endless Summer, which was a double album of their best stuff. And that album sold like hotcakes and brought them right back into the public consciousness, not with hit records on the charts, but with music. People going, this stuff is good music. So when my brothers bought that album, I remember wearing it out. I remember buying Spirit of America, a second double album Capitol put out of their other hits. And then I started learning and going, wait, this is just the tip of the iceberg. They put out so much stuff that this is just, and so I started buying all the other albums, and I bought Pet Sounds, and I bought all the different albums, and you start finding that the off tracks that were not released as singles were good. And it was amazing. And if you listen to the music, and I'm not a musician. I am not a musician. I can't sing. I can't whistle. I can't hum. Okay. But I enjoy music. And I discovered quite early on that you can listen to the Beach Boys music and hear something new in it each time you listened. You'd listen to it, and you'd hear the harmonies and the musicianship, and you'd sit there and go, "Wow, this stuff is so good." And to put that much work into these 2 or 3 minute long songs that so many people dismissed as like just, it was almost, they called it bubblegum music for a reason. They thought, oh, it appeals to the same people who consume bubblegum, but also it's like disposable, like bubblegum. Like you listen to this song today, you listen to another song tomorrow, this stuff will never last. It'll never last. And the thing about it is, it will last. And because it was constructed so well, and again, he talked in there about Good Vibrations being recorded at 4 different studios. He put a lot of work into that. And I've seen a documentary about the making of that song, and it's more convoluted than I thought how hard it was. And so all of it, Tim Nossum, Good Vibrations is still gold today. It's a perfect rock and roll song. Yeah. Vivian Patton. Yeah, I loved In My Room. Here's the thing. A teenager's writing songs like In My Room, like a thoughtful song, A.R. Whitman, I was just listening to Pet Sounds when this came across my feed. Theodore Benson, I need sand now. Go Fives, can you dance? Absolutely not. Art S points out the Wilsons and the Jacksons both had domineering fathers. And yes, that is true. And, it very well could be the Beach Boys may have never amounted to much if their dad hadn't been there to get them the record deal. I believe he also was musically oriented, and I believe that he did work with their music when they were starting out. And they got started very, very early and got a record deal pretty quickly. So, that's good. But on the other hand, Brian says, he's the one who hit me and caused me to go deaf in one ear. And then, like I said, he sold their music for a while, and they had to fight to get it back. I told you so. It says, I saw Brian Wilson at the Warfield, San Francisco, USA Imagination Tour, October 20th, 1999. Very cool. Yeah. And so like I said, I saw the Beach Boys a whole bunch of times in high school, junior high and high school. And they'd play Pine Knob in Detroit, or just north of Detroit. And they'd literally put on like 7 or 8 shows for 5 or 6 days. And on the weekends, they would do these matinees. They would come out and do a show at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then once the place cleared up, they'd come back and do a night show. And I would go to the matinees. And you've never seen on a sunny day more people having fun outdoors in the sunshine than a sold out show singing along with the Beach Boys. And what was amazing about the Beach Boys is, like I said, I've seen them many, many times. They would literally play nothing but wall-to-wall hits. And I remember they'd walk off stage, and I go, I know they're going to come back and do an encore because they haven't played. And I could name the 4 or 5 songs they hadn't played. But the next year, it'd be a totally different thing. But they'd always had some songs they have to play. You got to play Barbara Ann. You got to play I Get Around. You got to play Good Vibrations, And it was just amazing. I remember being down in the pavilion, in a seat, and turning around during one of the songs and looking at the hill and seeing a wave of humanity in the sunshine, singing along with the Beach Boys. So MJ says Brian Wilson wrote Surf City for Jan and Dean. Beach Boys manager was driving, heard it, pulled over, and angrily called and demanded to know why they released a new song without telling him. First surf song to become a national #1 hit. Yeah, Jan and Dean were friends of the Wilson brothers and the Beach Boys. And I've actually met Jan and Dean. Years later, they played a place in Flint that the radio station was working at, was hosting them for. Very, very nice guys. But Don't Worry Baby, Test Pilot with country singer Lori Morgan brought a tear to my eye when I heard her husband just died here a few days ago. Chicken Ray, Pet Sounds was awesome. Romark 85, Endless Summer. I had it on 8-track. Still love it. Larry's Dinner. This is the worst trip I've ever been on. Home. Please let me go home. Padre, Paul Tanner, the inventor of the theremin, played it on 4 of their songs, with Good Vibrations being the best, the most known. Yeah, that's the weird thing that warbles, especially at the end of the song. Steve Ludwig, God Only Knows, and In My Room are 2 of the best rock songs in history. Creighton, I saw them at the Kellogg Arena in Battle Creek in '94. The place was packed. MJ, wow, you met Jan and Dean. Yeah. Probably about 1986. Oh, Jazz CD. They used to play the July 4th in DC every year, and those concerts were never the same. Yeah, I've seen those. I've seen footage of those shows. I've seen that. And these gigantic outdoor concerts in Washington, D.C. And I hate to say this, but I can't think of anything more American for just everybody. If you have to pick a musical group, the Beach Boys. So, Absa I have fond memories of surfing the California waves in the 70s and listening to the Beach Boys and other great music back then. The Wingnut Channel saw the Beach Boys perform on a very rainy day on Parley Beach in Canada in 1989 with my buddy Mike. Yeah, great times. Mark Miller, I was like Papa Umau Mau. Daniel Sullivan, Kokomo, and She's Real Fine, my 409. I'm going to tell you, I worked in radio playing oldies at 2 different stations, had all kinds of Beach Boys songs in there. And 409 was in the collection, but so was Shutdown. And Shutdown, the version we had in the studio, was 1 minute and 58 seconds long. So if you're getting too close to the top of the hour and you couldn't fit in a full song, you'd stick in Shutdown. That's why you'd always hear that right before the news. LJT Weston, I was named for a Jan and Dean song. What, the little old lady from Pasadena? Or the Anaheim Azusa Cucamonga Sewing Circle Book Review and Timing Association? Although I'm not sure there's a name in there or not. Oh. Q Lasik Films, That's Not Me is my favorite song. And again, you're naming songs that a lot of people are going to go, wait, that's not me. And yeah, it's an off track on one of their albums that people are going to go, what? Look it up and check it out. It's a cool song. Padre, the theremin, is the only instrument played by not touching it. Yeah, you get near it, but not touching it. Zafexi, who is Brian Wilson? Brian Wilson was the songwriter and one of the members of the Beach Boys. And he just passed away. The Beach Boys have sold hundreds of millions of records and have had many, many hits in the United States of America. Rudy, aren't you supposed to be working, Steve? I am. This is my job. Mark Miller, Wouldn't It Be Nice, is also a really good tune. Yeah, of course. And that's again another one. It doesn't quite sound like the earlier surf stuff, but you hear it and you go, oh, that's the Beach Boys. L. Doby just pulled the albums out. We'll spend the day in my childhood. And that's one of the other things I got to tell you is that I remember listening to this music as a kid in junior high, back when we had junior high. And I remember listening to this music, and it made me feel really good back then. And I listened to it while I was doing other stuff. We had a pool table in the basement. I'd be playing pool and listening to the Beach Boys, hanging out with my friends. And I would hear these songs, and those are fond memories for me. And so when I hear the music today, it brings me back either to hanging out with my friends, listening to the music, or being at those shows and watching them. So Jason Smith, how many members are left? Al Jardine and Mike Love are still around. There are other members of the band, but the traditional 5 are the 3 Wilson brothers, Jardine and Love. Angus McWhorter says Pet Sounds is one of my favorite long play albums, or an LP as we called them in the old days. And I'm not sure why my phone is making any noise, because I had, in fact, I thought shut it off. But my phone does this to me from time to time, just messes with me for no reason. So I'm now going to shut it off. Piano TM, wait, do we not have junior high anymore? No, they call it middle school. They shifted it, and it's middle school. So, Rudy, I thought you had a professional job. Michelle, Beach Boys music makes me want to dance. So many incredible hits. Sail on Sailor. Again, not surf music, but it's a great song. Jason Smith, thanks. Thank you for checking in. NS Geeks have the song Brian Wilson by the Bare Naked Ladies stuck in my head. I have a feeling right now a lot of radio stations around America are playing that song, and again, as an homage. Yeah, and Steve says, I remember the Daughters and Wilson Phillips. And again, they were they were putting out really, really good music, focusing quite a bit on vocal harmonies, of course, because it runs in the family. John F. Kennedy, terrible news. Yeah, 82 years old. So Matthias Liu, a legend of my youth, is gone. That was the time you wanted to come to California. Yeah, see, I always wondered, because Matthias is from Germany. I always wondered about people who lived in other parts of the world, and they hear surf music, and they hear the Beach Boys, and it does illustrate a culture. And on some level, it was representative of something. And I went to law school in California. Spent a lot of time in Manhattan Beach. Manhattan Beach. I could have lived there full time if I could have found a way to do it. I'm talking about on the beach. And you think about that. And so people in other countries are hearing this music going, that does sound like fun. That does sound like fun. Isaac Bob York says the old lady from Pasadena wasn't Brian Wilson. No, it was Jan and Dean. So Bob Blah Blah remembers being on the beach in New Jersey listening to the Beach Boys on an AM transistor radio. Good times. Mojo Horizon, I'm from Mexico. I love the Beach Boys. GoFi says Brian would lock himself in his bedroom for months. Well, they say he locked himself into his house for a couple of years, but I think people would run out and get him stuff. So Steve Ludwig says, without the Wilson brothers, the band isn't the Beach Boys. And it's obviously very sad, but these things happen. I remember when Dennis passed away, and I saw them play without Dennis, and then Carl passed away. But like I said, I'm very honored to be able to say that I saw Brian Wilson with the Beach Boys the one summer. I think it was, I wrote it down, was it 77 or 76, late 76, summer of 76, I believe it was. I saw him at Pine Knob, and he spent most of the day at the piano. In the earlier days, he played the bass, but they had someone else playing bass. He sat at the piano. Ram 50 V8, hello, Steve. Daniel Sullivan, Barbara Ann, and Help Me Rhonda. Remind me of girlfriends and ex-wives. That's always a thing when you meet somebody who's got a name that's in a song, and you always wonder about it, Joe Dunlap, God only knows. Rest in peace, Brian. Kay Perry, In My Room. Brooklyn Bounce and Ladybug, I like that song, Wouldn't It Be Nice? And again, like I said, that song came out not too long after the surf music, but it was you could hear it was them, but it wasn't the same stuff. MJ Dennis was a mess. So sad. I saw a documentary about his death, and he drowned, and it was very unusual. But there was a couple of different factors that played into it. Won't get too heavily into it, but I believe something fell in the water, and he was on a boat in a marina. The water wasn't that deep, and he just jumped in to get something and never came back up. Matthias says, and he's clarifying for me, the Beach Boys represented the American way of life for the young Germans. Beaches, big cars, and good-looking females in bikinis. And yes, Matthias, that is the American way of life. That is the American way of life. Douglas Gaxiola grew up listening to the Beach Boys. At one point in time, I'm pretty sure I had every single thing they put out. I just did not have it all in the original records. Some of the records I bought were replacements because you couldn't always find it back then. I'm sure it's always out there now. Gene North, their music always makes you feel good. John F. Kennedy, Endless Summer is a great period movie also. MJ says he was wasted talking about Dennis on a Good Morning America group interview of the band. It was a mess. Yeah, he had some issues. Think about how hard it would be if you were a young person. The first thing you did was not just a success, but made you world famous and filthy rich. You'd have a hard time struggling with that, I think. I mean, you could. So Robin saw them perform in Wisconsin with John Stamos. John Stamos played drums and toured with them for a while. And he was one of the first people to fill in for Dennis when Dennis passed away. I.E. Crimes is so weird. I was reading about him yesterday. Art S, did you learn how to surf? No. I went out with my friends one day, and we spent a day, and it was not a good day to learn. But we spent a day paddling around out there with surfboards, but didn't do a whole lot. Yeah, Steven Stryker points out the oddity that he, in fact, did not surf, and that was a running joke, is that the only person who surfed in the family was Dennis. And somebody asked them quite early on, "Oh, you guys all surf?" And I think Brian said, "No, I don't surf." What do you mean you don't surf? You write those songs. And there's some famous footage of him someplace running into the water carrying a surfboard is like a kind of a joke. Truth Transistor Radio, Till I Die. My favorite Brian Wilson song. He's got so much stuff you've never heard unless you really did a deep dive into him. So, I.E. Crimes, the Beach Boys were never cool, but dang, did Wilson's genius produce some incredible music. That's the thing. There was a time when the Beach Boys were considered to be uncool. Don't forget, Jimi Hendrix once famously made a comment about never having to hear surf music again. Of course, don't get me wrong, Hendrix was a genius, but the Beach Boys music will live on. So 57 Boomer Shut Down and Spirit of America. Again, songs like Spirit of America, although it's the name of a double album later, was another song they did about the car, Spirit of America. Got 700 people in here right now. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you all showed up. Thank you very much. FMD, help me, Rhonda. Oh. Richard Calaby says you can always hear Beach Boys music at the Back to the 50s car show at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. Yeah, it's often oldies stations actually have a problem because so much of the stuff was hits. It's like the Beach Boys, Beatles, Motown. They would be disproportionately represented if you were actually fair about it. So they just pick some of them and not others. So, MJ, did you ever go to the Kettle in Manhattan Beach for French onion soup? I may have been in the Kettle, but I don't remember eating French onion soup. So, Dub World VW Adventures, rest in peace, Brian. You set the soundtrack of my life. LA Detroit, even the cool people can recite their lyrics. Dominic says, Love and Mercy, a great movie if you'd like to see a good movie about his life. I recommend it too. I really enjoyed that movie in the sense that it was, I believe, a decent representation of what he went through and later on. And, it's I think, a great movie. So William Esposito just saw this, didn't know until this came on the live stream. Thanks for posting, Steve. Dalton's band, Tortured Soul, finally at rest. R.I.P. Yeah, and that's the sad part. And this happens to a lot of very, very famous and wealthy people. People start hanging around, and some people manage to work their way into that inner circle who probably shouldn't be there. I'm not saying with Brian necessarily, but I'm just saying that they've got to be on their guard because so many people will try to get in there. So Kay Kendall says the manager is Brian's father, Murray. For a while, yes, but then there was other issues came along. So Ben Morris saw the notification, just froze. Yeah, sorry about that. Kevin Smith, wish they all could be California girls. Not the same as back then. And remember that long guitar intro to California Girls. And again, that's one of those songs, they do it live, the place would go nuts. D. Morgan, I saw the Beach Boys at Pine Knob back in summer '79. I was probably at that show or one of the shows of that series. They would often come in and do 4 or 5 days in a row at Pine Knob and sell them all out. Michael Proctor, you need to check out Three Oaks, Michigan. Okay. I've been there. MJ, the whole Manson family thing, I think that really effed Dennis up. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stories about that. There's no question that some members of the Manson family, including Charles Manson, met Dennis Wilson. I believe they were hitchhiking and he picked one of them up or something. And next thing you know, they were hanging out together. And Charles Manson at one point wanted to be a musician and or a songwriter. But that's a whole nother side story here. So Mike Lackner says, I'm not wealthy enough either for an inner or an outer circle. Locked on Law reminds us that Glenn Campbell played on many of those Beach Boys songs we love. I believe he toured with them for a while also, because Brian Wilson apparently stepped back from touring while they were still touring. And they're like, dude, we need someone to pick up the slack. And I think Glenn Campbell is one of the people who did that for them. So 57 Boomer, I'm not crying. Wags 99999. Being in high school in the first half of the 60s was a great time to grow up. Good music, good cars. Yes, when I was listening to it, it was already getting to be old music. But that was because their first wave had kind of diminished and their second wave is coming back with Endless Summer. Kel Marie, I've seen the Beach Boys twice, love them. Endless Summer was my favorite album when I was a kid. Capital Ideas says Manson also hung out with Neil Young for a while. Young wrote the song Revolution Blues about Manson. Okay, I did not know that. Leanne, Be True to Your School. Interesting, there's a couple different versions of that song. I worked at a radio station. We had the version with those cheerleaders in the background chanting, push him back, push him back, push him way back. And it ruined the song. And I don't think Brian put that there, but somebody did. Grievous Skoger, the Beach Boys were one of a few bands that I actually paid real money for the albums. And I learned the art of piracy. I bought their albums back when you bought the LPs and they had the actual artwork and liner notes and stuff. So Rick Oliver, as a kid growing up in the 60s in the Tennessee Hills, the Beach Boys fueled my love for the beaches and ocean and our annual family vacation to the beach. Cinema Music 55. People tend to forget about guitarist David Marks when mentioning the early Beach Boys lineup. Yeah, he's in a bunch of the early photographs, and he kind of comes and goes. But I also know that he also, I believe, toured with them after Brian dropped out. But I know that he was also playing with them very, very early on. Yeah, Woody Stems points out that Surfing USA was co-written by Chuck Berry, because Chuck Berry wrote the music and Brian just redid the lyrics and then re-recorded it with the Beach Boys. So, yeah, Caligula of the Gods says Glenn Campbell was a legendary session musician, part of the Wrecking Crew. Dominic S. remembers the different versions of Be True to Your School. Johnny Lightning, I was two of the Beachers. Oh, I think I can fix this. I was tour guide to two of the Beach Boys to dinner when they played at EMU in 1971 or 72. Wow. Is that EMU is in Eastern Michigan? Yeah, Woody Stem says Surfing USA is Sweet Little 16 by Chuck Berry, just different lyrics and then reworked. So, Capital Ideas reminds us that Carol Kay, who often played bass, I think I said Carol Kane accidentally earlier, Carol Kay, played bass on Pet Sounds and Smile, said Wilson was her favorite producer to work for. Cal Marie says a lot of their songs did sound like Jan and Dean and vice versa. In fact, I know that Jan and Dean actually sang on a couple Beach Boys songs also, probably uncredited. Matthias says when the Beach Boys started, we still had black and white TV sets. Well, you got to understand, you can find black and white footage of them performing on television. Oh. MJ says the Beach Boys' first number one hit in 20 years was Kokomo. And Brian Wilson was the only Beach Boy not involved in it. Yeah, because that's the one that he did not write. So, Capital Ideas K was also part of the Wrecking Crew. So, MJ loved learning all this musical trivia. So, MJ says Jan and Dean would also play with them on tours. I never saw them tour together, but I'm sure they did. Jan and Dean had some great music too. A lot of really interesting stuff. Leanne, the Turtles were friends too. I'm not making this up. Was it Mark Volman and Howard Kalin of the Turtles? I met those guys, Flo and Eddie. Same place I met Jan and Dean, believe it or not, but not the same evening. Randy Veneer, thanks, Steve. Until next time. Bob Blah Blah, do you think the Beach Boys were the inspiration for Jimmy Buffett? I'm sure they're one of the inspirations. Slaughter Bartfest says Ricky Fattar played guitar with the Beach Boys before he played in the Ruddles with Neil Innes. Ricky Fattar was in the band, I believe, in the late 70s. So, Get Fit, Dead Man's Curve. Keith Massini says Flo and Eddie were discovered by Frank Zappa. Astrophotography 101, Don't Worry, Baby, is one of my favorite songs. Wilson's lead vocal is considered one of his defining performances. I agree with that. And interestingly, it's a really, really emotional song until you realize he's talking, the protagonist is talking to a girl, and he's about to go for a drag race. And he's saying, don't worry, I'm going to win. I'll come back. So Leanne says Mark Volman wrote a book called Happy Together. I'll have to check that out. I love musical autobiographies, mentioning the Beach Boys. And Sugar Nut says, yes, the Wilson brothers are now all gone. Mike Love is still with us. Al Jardine is still with us. Although last I heard, those two weren't getting along. So I don't know what will happen there. But Leanne says Mark and Howard played with Zappa while under a lawsuit because they could not play as the Turtles. Oh, and don't forget Bruce Johnston. Jonathan R. points out Bruce Johnston was one of the guys who came in very, very early to fill in when Brian left. And then I know he toured with them later and continued touring with them. So, but I'm going to wrap it up now. Although Dominic S. points out the documentary The Wrecking Crew is an amazing doc about the actual musicians that made Pet Sounds happen. There's quite a bit about Wilson on it. Yeah, so what would happen is Brian Wilson, musical genius, would write out the music and the lyrics, and then he'd bring in the best musicians he could find, and he'd lay down the musical bed. Then he'd bring in the guys, and they would sing the vocal tracks, and then they would learn the music so when they toured, they could play it decently, but the stuff on the albums was always better, much, much better than they could ever do on stage. But they were open about it. They're like, that's how we do it, And it also allowed Brian to spend more time making the music while those guys were out touring. And so, that's the story. But again, got to let you know that Brian Wilson, Beach Boys co-founder and singer, dies at the age of 82, the last of the three Wilson brothers in the Beach Boys. And I mentioned at the top, the Beach Boys, one of the first groups that I got really heavily into as a young man, really made me appreciate music, really got me into it. And to this day, I still enjoy it. So it's sad to see that happen, but 82 years old, and he's left us a body of music that will outlive us all. So I'll talk to you all later. Thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day. Bye-bye.